Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com, as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Multiple ways you can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on Twitter, hashtag GiantsChat, and you can directly interact with us. I'm at Lance Medow, one word, last name, M-E-D-O-W. He is at Giants WFAN, as you hear John Schmelk as well in the background. We'll get to him in a second. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. Well, we no longer have to tease what we're going to do off the top of the show, since you
have heard that intro before, Lance.
Yes.
It is not the first time I've heard
just a tad, yes, that you have heard that intro. As we bring in John, who is in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl, so we've been getting regular reports from him from a daily basis, and his practice reports are up on Giants.com, so anything we don't cover here in the conversation, feel free to peruse that when you get a free moment on Giants.com. But let's start, John, with what I like to call the participation level at the Senior Bowl and the level of activity and how much it fluctuates from day to day. So what is the latest, at least at that front, as you've been monitoring, obviously, all of these personnel groupings?
Yeah, I feel like the phone lines between agent and player were a-buzzin' last night, because I'm sure a bunch of agents talked to some GMs and some scouts, and they were told that their players have shown enough, and it's time to get the heck out of here. Because there are a bunch of guys that really had the best first couple of days did not participate today. Some guys just upright and are gone. They're not even here. Other guys were here. They just didn't participate. So I'll kind of run down the list, and you won't be surprised. These are a lot of the names that I've kind of talked to the last couple of days of guys that have stood out. Right. So Roman Wilson from Michigan, he's out of here. He's not participating the rest of the week. That includes the game. He's been the best wide receiver here, basically uncoverable. Ricky Pearsall, who I actually was not that familiar with before I showed up here, almost 6'1", 193 pounds. He had a great first 2 days. He did not participate today. Leitu Latu, the pass rusher from UCLA, he was down there, and he was limping, so I think he has a legitimate injury. He did not participate today, but he's fine. I talked to him yesterday around 4 o'clock, and he was fine. So this isn't anything long-term with him, obviously. And you can go, by the way, check out all those Senior Bowl interviews on the Giants Huddle podcast. I think that's up. Pearson could tell the folks whether that's up.
It is up. We got the thumbs up. It's confirmed.
Yes. So go check that out. Jackson Powers Johnson, the guard center from Oregon, who I think probably has been the best player here so far. He's not participating today. Taliese, who I realized I was pronouncing his name incorrectly, so it's Taliese Fuanga from Oregon State. He's one of the guys interviewed on that Giants Huddle podcast as well. He was here. He just didn't really participate today. And then cornerback from Toledo, Quinion Mitchell, who's really, you could argue he's been the best player here, but he's certainly been the best corner. It hasn't been close, to be honest with you. From Toledo, he's been great, and he's here still, but he did not participate today. So those are the guys that are not working. I think I hit all of them. But, yeah, a lot of guys getting calls to their agents like, dude, you're good. Let's not get hurt. We're good.
You know why that stinks, John? Because I'm sure there are a lot of bubble guys who would love to have been there at Senior Bowl practice this week to give themselves a chance to be drafted. Maybe not, third round or fourth round. Maybe guys who would have been third-day guys even, who might have helped themselves, and they couldn't get in because the list of invitees got closed, and now these folks are heading out of town. I just think that stinks, and I wonder how many guys are going to leave after today and may not even stay for the game.
Yeah, and I'm sure Jim Nagy's not thrilled with it. And I'm sure some of these guys might have real injuries too. I don't have the injury report on these guys. I'm sure a lot of them are hurt. Minor things here or there. Yes, but we did get 2 full days of practice out of these guys, which is better than what we got last year when DeJuan Jones left after basically 6 reps, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State. So at least we got 2 full days out of everybody. Nobody stepped away after 1 day. So I think these guys did help themselves. I think scouts did get a lot of information. But, yeah, I mean, I'm sure the guys that, did not get the invite that wanted to come, they see that. They're a little disappointed. But the good news now is, guys, for the guys that are left at those positions where these guys departed,
more snaps.
There's going to be so many reps for them, not just in practice today.
In the game, yeah.
I mean, you basically had the wide receivers left on this team, which is Jacob Cowing, Arizona, Luke McCaffrey, Rice, Brendan Rice, USC, Devontae Walker, North Carolina, and Malachi Corley, Western Kentucky, they were basically in every other snap. So these guys were getting a ton of reps. So the guys that are left, they'll be the beneficiaries of being a chance to show these talent evaluators what they can do.
John, I'm very curious because I had not watched any of the USC receivers. Brendan Rice, who was the son of Jerry Rice, is at the Senior Bowl. I haven't seen much of him in the TV highlights that I have watched, and I haven't read much about him. Have you had a chance to get an eye on him at all?
It was funny. I was talking to somebody on the sideline today, and Luke McCaffrey and Brendan Rice were lined up next to each other. And I joked to the guy I'm talking to. I'm like, hey, my dad played with your dad. And as I say that, Jerry Rice walks 3 feet in front of me on the sideline.
The GOAT.
I swear to God, I was laughing. Yeah, the GOAT, exactly. So I thought that was a very funny moment. Brendan Rice is interesting because he certainly looks the part. He's 6'2", he's 212 pounds, so he's got good size. He was a 100-meter sprinter in high school, so you would think he has speed, but you watch him and nothing really, jumps out at you.
John, they made that mistake about his dad, too, okay? Yeah. Don't forget
I know,
that.
But his dad was also extremely productive in college, right?
Yeah, he was.
And, it's not like Brendan Rice wasn't with a really good quarterback the last 2 years either, and Caleb Williams at USC. And even, I watched every snap Caleb Williams took this year. And not once did I say, oh, wow, that Brendan Rice, wow, he looks really impressive. So I think he's going to be, a round 5-ish type of pick. And then maybe, like his dad, he can play above his draft grade a little bit.
The other thing that just wanted to add when we were talking about the level of participation with the players is they are still down there to speak with team representatives too, even if they're not necessarily participating. So even though they may be taking a spot away from another player, they're still at least getting the full experience, and the most important aspect,
Lance,
if anything, is interacting with officials from NFL teams.
And Lance, by the way, those guys I listed, that was just a national team. The American team has not started yet, so my guess is that it's going to be another. And when I find out who they are, I'll text you guys and I'll let you know so you can
more
say it on the
defections,
show.
John, huh? More defections?
I got to imagine that there's going to be some number of guys on the American roster that are going to be gone after 2 days, but I don't know who they are yet. So when I find that out, I'll text Pearson and he can put in the doc.
I can't imagine any of the quarterbacks would skip out, though.
No. And I've never seen quarterbacks in the 5 or 6 years I've been down here. I've never seen the quarterbacks leave early, so I would be shocked if that happened.
Well, and I'm sure that's going to irritate Jim Nagy if that ever happens because he divvies them up to break down the game accordingly. So other positions you could get around, not necessarily the case with respect to the quarterbacks.
And by the way, Lance, it's because I think for the quarterbacks, it's the game that's most important.
Sure.
For a lot of these other positions, it's the one-on-ones, defensive line, offensive line, wide receiver, defensive back. But for quarterbacks, linebackers, running backs, tight ends, the game's more important for those guys. So I think those are the guys more likely to kind of hang out and stick it out the rest of the week.
Speaking of the one-on-ones, I want to bring up 2 offensive linemen just based on pure size who you happen to highlight in your practice report. Number 1 is Jordan Morgan, 6'5", 312 pounds. I know there's questions about his hands, which always tends to come up in terms of offensive line play. And then the other one is Patrick Paul, who's on the American team, 6'7", and then the wingspan clearly jumps off the page at 36 1/4.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with Patrick Paul, and he is a large man. He's kind of built. He doesn't look 333 pounds. He's kind of built like an NBA small forward almost. He's very long and he's lanky. I see him as more of a developmental guy. He's one of the guys I talked to on that John Soto podcast episode. And he kind of gives me some like Matt Parrott, Will Beatty vibes when you talk to him. He's kind of soft-spoken, really nice guy. So he's an interesting player.
Does he have a mean streak to him, though? That's the million-dollar question.
There was one – it's a good question. There was one rep yesterday when he finished off a play and he won and he kind of like got in the face of the defensive lineman like, see, you didn't beat me. So I did see a little bit of that in the rep stuff, but talking to him, he seemed like a really, really nice kid. As for Jordan Morgan, you're right, we have not talked about him yet, Lance. And he's another guy. Go check out the Giants on the podcast episode. He was a little annoyed that they didn't give him the extra 1/8 inch on the arm length. He only measured it at 32 7/8.
Oh, boy.
And that 1/8 of an inch is usually kind of like it's the 33-inch threshold, right?
Yeah.
Your arm's long enough to play offensive tackle, and the threshold is usually that 33-inch mark. So he was a little annoyed they didn't give him the eighth of the inch. And there are some people here that think he might end up at guard when all is said and done. But talking to him, he didn't take any snaps at guard this week. He doesn't even want to put that in talent evaluators' heads. He's like, I'm a tackle. I'm going to play tackle. He's done a nice job. I mean, he's been physical out there. He has been beaten a couple times, but that's going to happen in one-on-ones. But, yeah, look, I think he's a guy that could very easily be an end-of-the-first-round type of pick.
All right, I want to ask you about one of the quarterbacks we didn't talk about yesterday, John.
Yeah.
That'd be Rattler, who I understand has kind of helped himself a little bit, and he certainly is one of those guys on the lower end of the quarterback depth chart, but trying to move up.
Yeah, maybe in terms of what his draft prospects might be, but in terms of raw talent, Paul, he might have more raw talent than any quarterback here.
He could throw it.
I mean, he's only 6 feet tall, but he's 220 pounds, and he's probably thrown 2 15 to 20-yard outs this week that have been the best passes I've seen any quarterback throw, where he just zips it on a line right on the money and out, and he was usually to Xavier Legette, his teammate from South Carolina. Not surprising those guys have good chemistry with each other, right? So it makes sense, and I'll get to that in a second. But, yeah, look, he has certainly shown the type of talent that made him a Heisman finalist, or a Heisman favorite, I should say, not finalist, before the season started in his last season at Oklahoma. If I recall that correctly. I think that was 3 seasons ago. But, yeah, look, he's got all the tools. The interviews, to Lance's point, are going to be huge for him. You know, maturity, that sort of thing. Can he sell these teams on Spencer Rattler, the guy? Because Spencer Rattler, the quarterback, has all the talent in the world. It's funny, I talked to a couple of the draft experts that we have on the shows. I talked to a couple NFL people, too, about quarterbacks here. And they all said the same thing to me. Do not take a lot out of these all-star games. See how the ball comes out of the quarterback's hands. See how they handle themselves. But these quarterbacks are throwing 10 wide receivers they've never seen before, and they're learning a new offense. Someone reminded me today, it's probably the first time a lot of these quarterbacks are just calling plays in a huddle, given how, thing gets signaled in from the sideline in college, and everyone has like the little wristband, the little book on their waist where they just check the play.
John, they've never had speakers in the helmets either until now.
Right, that, and a lot of them haven't taken snaps from under center.
Yeah.
So all those things together, I think, be careful not to take too much out of these games, except, again, how the ball comes out when you meet with them in these meetings is important, and how they kind of handle themselves and their demeanor. I think those are the things that are really important. Then once you get to the game on Saturday, they've had a week with these guys. You're starting to learn the receivers more. How do they play in a game situation? But I thought Bo Nix today really did well. They did red zone offense, team in 7-on-7 today, and he had 3 consecutive touchdown passes during that, and a couple, including a nice pass into the back of the end zone to Devontae Walker, who's had a nice couple of days, if he can just cut down on the drops a little bit. So, look, I don't think any quarterbacks have really helped themselves. I'm not sure any of them have really hurt themselves. One thing I know is Sam Hartman from Notre Dame, his arm strength, I think, is going to be a big problem for him. He has trouble pushing the ball downfield. Joe Milton, my God, if you could build a quarterback in the lab, 6'5", 235.
He has a cannon.
Run. No, he's a cannon. He's a monster.
Yeah.
But, can he be consistent enough throwing the football? So these are all the things we're kind of keeping an eye on down here. But, look, it's been fun. I think these teams have been, really fun to watch.
Let me get one more with you, John, before Lance finishes up. I want to ask you about the offensive line. We talk all the time about guys who are interior linemen, can play guard or can play center, or maybe tackles that might be playing some guard snaps.
Sure.
Have you seen guys who we could talk about here this week who have been practicing at other offensive line positions as they try to show that to the NFL scouts?
And Jim Nagy and the coaches here, Paul, it's a great question. They do a great job of making sure these offensive linemen play different spots to show these scouts that they can do it. So I'll throw a few guys at you. Most of the tackles, they're having them play both sides, right and left. So that's one thing to note. A couple other guys inside. Dominic Pooney out of Kansas. He's played both guard spots and he's played center. I believe he was a guard only at Kansas, but he's taken some snaps at center today. I was watching down there on the field. Jackson Powers-Johnson, who, again, departed. He's not here, but he was dominant at both guard and center.
Okay.
He did a good job. Tanner Bortolini out of Wisconsin. He's played both guard and center over the course of this week. Isaiah Adams, he's played guard, center, and tackle. I think he's been at all 5 positions at one point from Illinois. 6'4", 316. He has some David Deal vibes to him a little bit as a guy, again, Illinois guy that can play a bunch of different positions. So that's the national team. Charles Turner III from LSU, he's been guard and center. Christian Haynes, who I should mention him. He's a UConn kid. 6'2", 318. He's almost got 34-inch arms. I think he's taken maybe 1 tackle rep, but he's definitely taken a lot of reps at both guard and center. And for, UConn, I'll consider that a smaller school, the way the college football is kind of set up these days. I think he's had a really nice week at practice, and he's played both those spots. So those are the guys that jump out to me immediately in terms of guys that they're working at different positions. And I think you will have a nice round 3, round 4 group that can be guard-center combos, Paul, that could be targets for the Giants here in this year's draft.
So we had a Matt Parrott comparison and a UConn reference during the course of this conversation.
Same
for those of you keeping track at home. David Deal, true, yes. Well, I was just thinking Matt Parrott's a former UConn Husky, so I was just trying to tie a nice knot around that. 2 guys that I want to bring up before we close up shop here is 2 guys with injury history. Now, you brought up Latu. For people that are unaware, is he suffered that neck injury, which forced him
2 years.
Correct, to briefly retire, and then he returned. And now you mentioned, I know it's unrelated, John, but he's now not going to take participation moving forward here in the next few days. And then Peyton Wilson, the North Carolina State linebacker, is another individual who also briefly retired and then returned to the fold. What you've seen out of those 2 guys and how much of anything that may be a concern from what you're hearing?
Yeah, Peyton Wilson has probably been one of the better linebackers here. He's big, he's physical, he's had a couple pass breakups as well. But yeah, the injury stuff for him is going to be big. He didn't, I don't think he played a full season at NC State until his last year when he finally managed to get through a full season. I did not have a chance to chat with him. The line to kind of get to him was a little bit too long. But, yeah, I think he's impressed, and if the medical stuff can get answered for him, I could see him being a day 2 pick in this year's draft. And then you go over to Latu. I did have a chance to ask him about his injury history, and he said, teams ask me about it. And I just I explained to them that, look, playing football is that important to me. Because I even asked him, I go, why are you here? He's going to be a top 15, top 20 pick. A lot of those guys don't show up to the Senior Bowl, right? And he goes, look, I love playing football. Like, I haven't played football in like a month and a half, and I'm not going to play football again till the spring. I like playing football, and I want to show these scouts and GMs that I love the game. And, these injuries are not going to keep me from playing. And he actually told me a really good story. I didn't know this. So after he medically retired, right, he went and played like intramural rugby at his school. I don't know if that was it. I think that when he was still at Washington. It might have been UCLA. I didn't get that out of him. And he tells the story in the John Soto podcast. People should go check it out. And he was so good at it, he got like a professional contract offer from somebody at the Professional Rugby League. This is while he was medically retired, mind you. Wow. Now, he didn't end up doing it because he knew he wanted to go back and play football. But it just shows that even after a neck injury and a medical retirement, he was still playing like intramural rugby. So this guy is certainly wired away that I would not worry about injuries holding him back at the pro level. He loves the game, and he's well built. He looks the part of a pass rusher, and you wanted to see him be dominant out here this week. And I thought the first day he started a little bit slow, but then second half of the first day and the second day, he was clearly the best edge rusher here. So I think Latu certainly checked the boxes he needed to check here in Mobile.
With all due respect to his IQ, you might not do well on the Wonderlic if the doctors tell you to medically retire and you go and play rugby.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Hey, he held up. And my guess would be, John, I would think it would have been at Washington because to Paul's point, 20 and 21, he did not play. He was still at Washington.
Yeah, that must have been Washington.
He came to UCLA in 2022. So in all likelihood, he fit in a rugby career in the mix of that. To me, what's fascinating is, and I know, listen, we talk about ACLs are different for players, but whenever you hear something about the neck forcing you to not play football, then you come back, I don't know. There's always that concern. God forbid he's hitting the wrong spot moving forward, takes a bad angle. That's the only thing that I would say is maybe a bit of a red flag.
If he played rugby, we know he can be the backup punter.
Well, there you go. Yes.
Look at
he and
Leighton
Gillen can share some war stories. Yeah.
Lance, to your point, look at Leighton Vander Esch with the Cowboys,
Sure.
right? He had the neck deal
Yep.
coming out. He's had a couple injuries, and now he might have to retire after he suffered. He kind of re-injured it last year with Dallas. So, yeah, neck injuries are an issue. I'm sure all these teams will put him through a battery of tests, either individually or obviously they do those tests at the combine as well. And those medical reports will be gone through with a fine-tooth comb. The good news is that the last 2 years, I believe, he's played for UCLA. He hasn't missed any time. He's been completely healthy. So that checks a box. But, of course, for people looking for a first-round pick, you want a nice, long career. That's going to be something teams are probably is even more important than anything he's done on the field.
Well, there you got it. The latest from the Senior Bowl, Mobile, Alabama, our very own John Schmoke. John, we look forward to speaking to you tomorrow and also getting the laundry list of every player on the American team that is not participating today.
I will get you the guys.
Be good, John.
Appreciate it, fellas.
You got it. All right. John Schmoke with us here on Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. As I mentioned, the full practice report is up on Giants.com. We're going to get to a few other news and notes from around the league before we open up the phone lines. But first, a few reminders. The Giants Huddle podcast, you can check that out on your favorite podcast platform. You could also head to Giants.com/podcast. As far as looking ahead to the 2024 season is concerned, you can take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2024 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit Giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available, and the Giants official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, it brings you original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. So the NFL head coaching carousel has come to a stop, Paul. Right before we came on, the 8th and final vacancy has been filled. Dan Quinn is staying in the division. He goes from being the Cowboys defensive coordinator to the Commanders head coach. So 8 vacancies, all filled. Now it's just a matter of assistants moving on. That means 2 things, though. Number one, the NFC East across the board is going to have 4 new defensive coordinators because Dan Quinn was the one we were waiting on that had a chance to stay. So that is going to be a big theme as we start to preview next season. The other thing that is connected to defensive assistants or offensive assistants moving, nothing official that the Giants have reported in terms of who they've interviewed, but multiple reports had indicated that Denard Wilson, Ravens secondary coach, had spoke with Brian Daboll. Well, he took the defensive coordinator job with Tennessee, and he was a candidate to replace Mike McDonald, who yesterday was named the Seahawks head coach. So the Ravens probably are going to promote somebody else from within. Wilson learned that, and he decided to take the Tennessee job. So the Giants still searching for a defensive coordinator, but so are several other teams within the division because Vic Fangio is the only individual that we know has been solidified as the Eagles DC.
And we all know that these all-star games are also kind of pseudo-conventions.
Where everybody talks.
For a lot of guys who are maybe not affiliated with the team right now, but they'll go to these practices. They've got the authorization because they've got ins with the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl and other NFL people because they've been experienced in the league. So they've got the ability to mingle with the other folks, and basically it's a convention of job hunters. It's a bunch of guys who are making sure that, hey, don't forget about me. I'm still here. I'm active. I'm still looking to work. And, hey, can we talk? I mean, in all honesty, that's a lot of what goes on during these situations. It happens at the combine, too, although guys do like to get their act squared away before the combine. You don't really want to wait that long. But there's no question. And even to be honest, even some at the Super Bowl, there's a lot of NFL personnel there. And there's still some people who are still looking to fill spots, and there'll just be a lot of folks trying to knock on doors and dialing up phones, seeing if they can connect. It's going to be quite a scramble now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that's why I highlighted that, Paul, because you went exactly where I wanted to take this conversation. There is a bit more urgency now, I think, across the board, because once all the head coaches are in place, now you know they're all simultaneously looking to fill out their staffs.
The dominoes fall quickly.
Correct. Now, granted, some head coaches have already filed out some of their positions, okay? But the majority are still seeking coordinators, and that impacts the Giants because even though they hired a special teamer, Brian Daboll still needs to find a defensive coordinator. Remember, keep in mind, it's still possible Brian goes in-house. We've talked about the candidates. Jerome Henderson, Andre Patterson, who has experience as a defensive coordinator. It may not be somebody outside the organization. Clearly, he's doing his due diligence, but we've also seen individuals promoted from within. So don't overlook that while everybody's scrambling to find various assistants.
And Joe Shane, the GM, just said the other day he was hoping to see something happen by the end of the week. So it is Thursday.
The clock is ticking. So
it is Thursday.
We got one more day.
What did Yogi say? It's getting late earlier out here?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, we'll see.
All right, so that's the latest with respect to what's going on around the league, as well as the NFL draft. Let's open up the phone lines as we move forward here on Big Blue Kickoff Live, and we'll check in with Jesse in New York, who joins us here on Thursday's edition. What's happening, Jesse? What do you got for us?
Hey, how's it going, Lance? Paul, how you guys doing?
Hi, doing well.
Long-time listener. Appreciate what you guys do. I don't always obviously agree with everything that you guys say, but like Lance said,
that's
it's
fine.
Dialogue. So,
that's allowed.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. So, the Wilson hiring in Tennessee, after hearing that he had a second interview, I was kind of like, maybe we're onto something. He might be the guy for the job here. But now that he's going to Tennessee, all I see all over social media is how doom and gloom. The Giants are kind of screwed, and they're something's wrong with Brian Dable, and nobody's going to come and want to work here. So it's I'm curious what your opinion is. Do you think that there is merit to what we were hearing that Brian Dable's hard to work with, or just something along that line. Just
well,
curious.
I mean, with respect to Denard Wilson, and I think I even tweeted about this a little bit. Number one, I think, and this is just my opinion, I think he comes from a Baltimore organization that has a track record, and I tweeted out everybody that has been promoted under John Harbaugh. So I think even though Wilson, according to reports, of course, spoke with the Giants twice, and part of that was timing in terms of when the Ravens were eligible to allow their assistance because of buys and them having to navigate them still playing football versus other teams not, is that he probably was saying to himself, well, if Mike McDonald doesn't get hired until the very end of the cycle, I want to wait and see if Harbaugh is going to promote me to be the next defensive coordinator. I'm sure that probably was on Wilson's mind. And then once he finds out, okay, he's not going to be the guy, then he goes into exploring other options. Now, weighing Tennessee versus the Giants, I mean, we could sit here all day till we're blue in the face and say the pros and cons. It doesn't seem as if he has a connection to Brian Callahan, but he does have a connection to Rand Carthon, the general manager. And remember, relationships is a big part of things, Jesse. If you know somebody at a team and you have an established relationship, you feel a lot more comfortable going to that team because you have a pre-established connection there. So I wouldn't overlook those two factors that I just brought up. It may have nothing to do with the Giants whatsoever and a lot more to do with what's happening with those other teams.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. I was I read again social media. I don't take everything that the beat writers say to heart because it's they're not inside the building. They don't talk to Brian Dable directly. Things of that nature. But I was just kind of curious because everyone is freaking out now on Twitter. And
well, I mean
Facebook
they've talked to, and once again, according to multiple reports, because the team doesn't make anything official about interviews, they've also, according to multiple reports, spoke with a lot of other candidates outside the building. So, I mean, we don't know what Brian Dable is going to decide, whether it's going to be internal or external, but just because Wilson's not going to be the guy doesn't mean that they may not bring in somebody who also previously interviewed.
And if I may pipe in, there are some people who think I'm very hard to get along with, but Brian Dable and I get along great. So, take that for what it's worth. I don't think there's any issue out there. I think that's a lot of garbage that was thrown out into the atmosphere, much like most of what you read on the web.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I know a lot of people criticize, a lot of people are, they're not happy with the way he conducts himself. Me personally, I don't have an issue. I don't care if he yells on the sideline. I mean, watching that Two Bills documentary that they had, and I'm like, knowing how Bill Belichick and Parcells were, I'm like, it doesn't really bother me that he gets, he expects a certain level of excellence, and if he has to yell on the sideline, it is what it is. I'm not, I never really got, some people are just like, oh my God, how can you work for somebody like that? I don't know, it's insane. But I did read a couple of days ago. I think they brought in Brendan Daly from the Kansas City Chiefs for an interview, and I know he was a Spags and a Belichick guy, so I think that was kind of interesting.
Well, and that's why I said, according to reports, there's been other candidates. So just because Wilson is not getting the job, I wouldn't read so much into it, Jesse, I guess at this point, to say that there's a narrative that is supported based on that evidence. They could still very well bring in somebody from the outside, and what are people then going to turn to about how people perceive what's going on with the Giants building?
I leave you with this item. Given that there were so many spots that were still to be decided over the course of the last several weeks, as we tried to explain, that meant there were a lot of dominoes on the table and guys who were waiting and waiting and waiting and trying to weigh their options, and guys who probably had communication and phone calls saying, yeah, I'd be interested in that job, but I'm waiting on this job first. So don't take it to mean that just because a guy is going to be hired now in early February, that he was not necessarily a good choice. He might have been a guy, the guy they eventually hire may have been very high on their list, but may have wanted to delay his decision for some other reasons, whatever they may have been. Or, for that matter, maybe there are some guys that the Giants asked for permission to talk to who now suddenly get permission. Remember, there was reports that a number of guys that they wanted to speak with were denied by their current teams, and the Giants were told, you cannot talk to them. Well, what if some of those teams now say, all right, now that the smoke is cleared, you can talk to this guy again? So don't take the timing of the Giants' hire to equate to the guy's credentials or their desire to have him. I think that's a safe thing to say.
Yeah, that's true. I know, because like you said, Paul, don't read everything you read on the don't take everything you read on the web to heart, because, like I said, it's just crazy how now people are freaking out, and it's like, oh, now the Giants are left in a tough spot, and all of a sudden they're gonna make a last hitch decisions, like their last choice for DC. Now, we're kind of in a bad spot for next year, which I don't.
But the problem is, Jesse, you'll never know where these individuals rank, regardless
of
what
never
anybody
know.
writes,
You'll
right?
never know.
I mean, if they promote somebody internally, you're not going to know. If they bring somebody externally, you're not going to know other than pure speculation. So I wouldn't lose much sleep in it, because you're never going to get confirmation. Nobody's going to publicly come out, and no coach and no organization, yeah, we feel great about the hire. He was the 5th guy on our list. So here, feast on the individual. They're never going to make a statement like that. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that.
True. Last question. I'm going to take it off the air.
Sure.
Obviously, it's very hard to guess. Obviously, it's never really going to. No one's ever going to really get it right. But in your opinion, obviously, it's hard to think about it without free agency being done, because that's going to really affect what they're going to do in the draft. But what do you think is the most pressing need? And if you were the one choosing, who would you which player would you take?
You're talking about the 6th overall pick, though, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah,
and we'll let you go on that note, Jesse. Appreciate the phone call.
You don't know who the first 5 guys are off the board, so how could you?
Well, he asked about more position. If you were to prioritize, we can maybe look at it from that
standpoint. We know there are
standpoint.
3 positions the Giants have to prioritize: offensive line, pass rush, and receiver. We know that those are 3 positions they need to get better at.
Well, and I'd also add quarterback depth chart, depending on what happens in free agency.
Quarterback depth chart, but free agency may wind up providing the answer.
It's possible, yeah. But right now, I think it remains something that needs to be addressed. And even Jim Shane admitted that himself. Yeah.
I'm not sold, though, that you have to take the quarterback at 6.
Well, no, I'm not saying that has to be, but I think as it stands right now, it can be at least an option in the conversation.
Yeah,
we haven't had free agency.
I'd be more surprised if the 3 positions I named, if they pick at 6, I'd be surprised if one of those 3 positions don't wind up being the 6th pick, because there are some very high-profile players. We know that there are 3 receivers up in the top 10. We know there are at least 2 offensive linemen who are in the top 10. There's the potential for maybe possibly 2 pass rushers in the top 10. So in that regard,
there should be some choices.
There will be choices in those
quarterbacks
spots
to choose potentially from, depending on how things go early in the draft. So I think that fits the profile of all of the positions. in terms of the biggest priority, and once again, it's hard to answer that when you don't know what the team does in free agency.
No doubt.
That's what makes it challenging because so many things come into play that influence that. But I point to, if you just weigh offense versus defense, and granted, there's going to be a new defensive coordinator. So when there's a new defensive coordinator, the dynamics change. But I keep coming back to what the offense averaged this season. Just over 15 points per game, nearly a touchdown less, Paul, than the previous season when they were just over 21. You got to score points in this league. And I know that sounds generic, but you have to. It's no coincidence the Niners had the third overall offense, scoring-wise, in the NFL. And I know the Chiefs weren't top 5 material this year, but they had the number 2 scoring defense. So one way or another, you got to be highly ranked. And they also happen to have a generational type quarterback and a generational type tight end. But the Giant, you can't hover around the 15 to 21 point barometer. And the only way to move up the ladder, and you know I've been on the record, you can't even expect that to happen within a season where you increase by a touchdown. But you need weapons. You need guys to stay healthy. But you need multiple options to chip in around the quarterback. So at 6, if they're in position to bring in another playmaker, I think that's hard to pass up on because of the factors that I just mentioned.
Hence why I also think trading down is a very, very viable option to try to get some more picks.
Though you're going to, in all likelihood, need somebody that's enamored with a quarterback. And once again, as we discussed, Paul, if 3 guys are off the board by then, a team may say, we'll just wait to see if we can get the quarterback we're picking. So that could complicate matters.
Could be.
Yeah. All right, let's head back to the phone lines. Got Randy in California here with us on BBKO. What's happening, Randy? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys. How you doing today?
We're doing well. What's on your mind?
Hey, I got a question. I mean, I've been listening to you guys for years. I've been listening to everybody on the internet, TV, talking about trade up, trade down. But when you got a team like we've had the last couple of years, we got a lot of holes. We're not one season away from turning this around. I think we're like 2, maybe 3, right? But we need to build this team. And I still think, like you just said a minute ago, trading down makes the most sense in the world if you can get a partner to do it with you.
But you also need to weigh that against who you could potentially grab at number 6. I'm with you, and I know Paul was just talking about this. It helps if you get multiple picks. There's no doubt about it. But remember, it's not the volume of picks, Randy. It's what you do with the picks. You can get 3 additional picks. It's all about getting a bang for your buck. If you pass up on a huge game changer at number 6 just to get 2 or 3 additional picks, you have to weigh then what you're giving up with that potential game changer. That's a big part of the dialogue when you're evaluating when you're on the board.
Now, one thing to keep in mind, and that is most people agree this draft is deepest in terms of top 3 rounds at wide receiver and at offensive line, which just happen to be 2 of the 3 priorities for this Giants roster. So if you want to consider the math, if you can get more picks in the first 3 rounds, you're looking at the opportunity to add quantity at those 2 spots where you should have some really good value, at least by the end of day 2.
Well, and I agree with that mentality. I'm just saying, though, I think there could very well be a drop-off. For example, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is on the board, I'm just giving you a hypothetical. I know you're smirking already, okay? Just bear with me.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, okay. Well, you're smirking there from afar of the phone.
I take him.
Okay, you take him. Right. Okay, so that's my point. So my point is, Randy, you're not going to pass up on Marvin Harrison Jr. even if the phone rings and somebody's willing to offer you 2 or 3 picks. So I'm a big believer. Volume is great, and you can tell me all you want about depth, but if you look around the draft room, and Paul and I have had a lot of these conversations in previous drafts, if there is conviction in the room, okay, you're on the board at 6. Everyone in the room says, take this guy at number 6. We cannot pass up on him.
That's it.
You take the guy, period. The dialogue ends right there. I don't care whether they are offering you 17 acres of real estate to add to the swampland here at the Meadowlands, okay?
Florida.
It doesn't matter. Or in Florida, wherever you want. You're picking that player at 6, and that's my point.
And that's the way it was with Barkley. Yeah. When they took Barkley at number 2, everybody was all in on him. You take him. There's no argument.
Right. And I got one more quick thing, if you guys don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, real quick.
could somebody please get a dump truck, back it up to Spags' yard, and dump it in his yard?
Well,
Right?
for what
Full
though?
of money. I would love to have him back. I've always been fascinated
him
with
and Andy Reid go
love
back so
Spags.
many years. You know, him and Andy Reid
my
are like they're
God.
like brothers.
Yeah.
And
I know.
you know,
I would love to have him. Oh,
I know. I get it. I get it.
I call him the mad scientist because that guy is a genius.
You know
And
what? I will promise you
think
this.
he's going to be wearing a yellow jacket someday? You think he's going to have that jacket on?
I'd love to see it.
He's
I don't.
got, what, 4 rings? Four?
It's interesting because
Well, he's going for his fourth.
well, I was gonna. It's an interesting question because I was gonna say, are there assistants who don't have a lot of head coaching
I've
experience
never known
in the
any
Hall of
pure
Fame?
coordinators
Yeah.
to get in.
I mean, that would be uncharted territory, Randy. I think that's what's going to hurt him. He's an accomplished defensive coordinator, but you'd be hard-pressed to find assistants on an island in the Hall of Fame. Most of them started as assistants, then became head coaches, and really achieved excellence. So he's very unique from that standpoint.
Yeah.
And we'll let you go
And
on that note. Yeah.
I would love to see him get another shot at that, by the way. And you guys have a wonderful day. I
Yeah,
appreciate
you got it, Randy.
Be good.
Appreciate the phone call.
I do text with Spags, and I promise you, Giants Nation, I will text him this week and tell him that the entire Big Blue universe is pulling for him to get another Lombardi.
But I was going to say, to the caller's point, if you're going to back up the truck, he probably wants head coach tied to that truck.
I'm sure he
okay?
does.
Something tells me he's not leaving to become a defensive coordinator
No.
elsewhere. And Andy Reid is wise enough to not let him leave to become a defensive coordinator elsewhere.
You know what? I've never had this conversation with him, but if Andy Reid should at some point see the end of the tunnel in Kansas City in the next year or two,
Do you think he's going to retire with Patrick Mahomes in his prime? Would you do that? No, forget that. Would you? I'm giving you Patrick Mahomes in your prime. Are you jumping to all of a sudden sip on a pina colada near the pool?
It
Yeah?
depends if that Caribbean island has unlimited cheeseburgers available.
Listen. Well, you're looking at it from Andy Reid's perspective.
Yes.
You're certainly not looking at it from your own perspective.
No,
No,
but-
I want you to answer it, though. I asked you.
know?
There is no way you're leaving to
Oh,
eat
I'm a lifer.
cheeseburgers. That's
I'm a
what saying.
football
You're a
lifer.
lifer.
I'll do this forever.
Well, Andy seems like a lifer, too, does he not?
I'm not sure. At some point, maybe he won't be. And I would think if I'm Kansas City, I'd have to be thinking that if there's any time soon that Andy Reid may decide to step aside, I'd want to keep Spags in the house.
Well, I'm looking up just out of curiosity.
How old is he?
Andy, that's what I was looking up. Andy's 65. Okay, Mahomes was drafted in 2017. You figure Mahomes stays healthy. I mean, he's going to get to in the 2030s minimum in terms of him playing at least, assuming he could hold up.
So you're saying Andy's going to coach past
Well-
his 70s?
Well, the point is, I mean, look at Belichick and Carroll. You're going to tell me Andy can't get to about 73? He can't get 8 more seasons? I find it very hard to
I
believe
don't know the man.
Andy's going to retire.
All right.
I mean, assuming good health, knock on wood, and we don't
Yeah,
wish
I don't
anything
know.
against him, I think Andy's going to try to ride this Patrick Mahomes wave as much as possible.
Maybe he does.
I'd be very surprised if Spags becomes available. Let's put it this way. Spags is leaving KC, and Spags, why would you leave?
No, Spags is not leaving
No,
KC. As
no.
long as Andy's there, he's not
Correct.
leaving.
Well, no, he may leave if somebody calls giving him a head coaching position again. I could see Spags wanting another shot.
Yes,
But short of
yes.
that, he's hanging
Right.
in
Well,
KC.
we've already established that.
Yeah.
Another head coaching spot would be something he would absolutely love to have.
Yeah.
But at this point, him and Andy, they're tied at the hip.
100%. Because they go back to those Philadelphia days. And remember, Andy Reid's staff produced a boatload of talent. It's amazing who came from those staffs.
When you
unreal.
consider that Belichick was a special teams coach here before they made him a DC, Spags was a linebackers coach with the Eagles before he became DC with the Giants. Perry Fewell had been a secondary coach before the Giants had made him a defensive coordinator, and he won a Super Bowl with this team.
I'm interested to see where this is going here.
Well, my point is, sometimes you can hire an assistant or a positional coach as your DC and still hit gold.
Oh,
The Giants don't necessarily, and this is going back to the fellow who was asking us
You
about.
talk about an internal promotion.
Well, it doesn't even have to be an internal. The point is, the fellow was saying that there are people on the web in a panic now because the big names are drying up or they don't know who the Giants are going to get for defensive coordinator. Well, the Giants have proven over the years that you don't necessarily have to have a veteran defensive coordinator to come into this spot to win. they've hired guys as the DC who were primarily position coaches in the past and then wound up getting here and turning into, really good DCs. So, don't be scared off or don't have any trepidation over the fact that they've been talking to a lot of guys either in-house or out of house who are strictly position coaches or other defensive assistants. It doesn't, you don't have to hire a veteran defensive coordinator who's done it for 20 years in this league to win, is really what I'm trying to say.
No, I'm completely with you. Well, I want to bring the Ravens back into the equation because I think Baltimore spells out your point even more effectively than the Giants do. And I'm going to bring up a tweet that I threw out the other day when Mike McDonald was hired. So here's the defensive coordinators real quickly, Paul, under John Harbaugh. Harbaugh took over in 2008. Mm-hmm. Rex Ryan, he inherited from Brian Billick. Okay. Then Ryan leaves to become the Jets head coach. Greg Madison, promoted from linebacker coach. He was there for 2 seasons. Right. Chuck Pagano was the secondary coach. He takes over for a season. Then he becomes a head coach. Dean Pease. He was the linebackers coach there. Okay. He took over from 2012 to 17, and Dean Pease went to New England, served under Belichick. Yeah. Wink Martindale takes over for Dean Pease. Wink was the linebacker coach. This is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, these are not external individuals, but all of those individuals were not defensive play callers.
Right, and at the time that they were hired, people
linebackers.
Probably questioned,
how
good are they going to be
they
in
weren't
this
household
new
names.
spot?
Yeah.
So
exactly. What I'm saying is it can be done.
No
Your
doubt.
point is well taken. You don't necessarily have to go after the individual play caller. You've got to give somebody a chance eventually, right? Mm-hmm. Even individuals, 8 head coaches were hired. 5 are first-timers in this cycle. So we don't necessarily know how they're all going to pan out. I mean, that's life in the National Football League. But life in the National Football League also involves an overwhelming amount of speculation. So who better to segue than Wilson in Roxbury? Wilson, what is the world of the media cooking up for us today?
Hey,
yes.
Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, listen, Lance, I got the perfect name for my phone call today. I'm going to call it Wilson's Fireworks because I'm going down swinging.
Okay. I was hoping for alliteration, but you fell short in that department.
Oh, man.
Paulie, can I ask you something? And
Yeah.
You know I love you and I respect you. Though.
What's up?
Why you always always just throw away all these speculations and you say that nothing is not true? I mean, why? I mean,
Speculation usually is not true. That's why it's speculation and not fact.
Paulie, listen. You think some reporters that are well known, they're not just they just wake up one morning and they just say, I'm just gonna write down that Brian Daboll has caused a toxic environment because I just want to do
Wilson,
that. You don't think there's no merit at all?
Wilson,
not even a little bit.
Wilson, I've been in this business over 40 years. I know the ins and outs of this business. I know how it works. When you've been in the media business for 40 years, then you can tell me. I don't know what occupation that you have, but I'm sure that you know your business better than I do.
No, I'm not telling you that you know. I'm not. That's what I said to you. No, Paulie, I would never disrespect you like that. What I'm saying is that you don't think that there's no merit at all, and I happen to think that if I read something from somebody, it's got to have some kind. It can't be all fake news. That's all I'm saying to you, Paulie. That's all I'm saying.
There are times when stuff is purely fake. There are other times when there is a matchstick of truth to it, but it's made out to be a Chicago bonfire. Okay? And that's just the way it is. And unfortunately, because, see, I will tell you one thing, Wilson, and please understand this, because I'm not trying to be funny. Today's media more than ever relies on attention. It relies on clicks, and there's tremendous competition around the entire atmosphere, I should say. And when I say atmosphere, I'm talking about the electronic, whether it's the TV, whether it's the radio, whether it's the computer. There is tremendous competition to stand out and to get your item the most eyeballs and the most listening or ears shot, if you will.
All right. Can I ask you something?
So please understand, whatever crumb may be true, it is going to be blown up because that's how it gets the most attention. That's just the nature of the business today.
It's important to know Wilson actually finds time to read and listen to everything that is put out there, which is quite amazing.
Lance, I got a lot of time. I got a lot of time on my hands. But can I ask you?
Well, at least you admitted it, so we don't have to confirm it. But yes.
And Wilson, let me just throw one other thing at you. Sirius NFL Radio, which Lance does work for, full disclosure. Okay, full disclosure, he does work for them.
Well, because I was trying to keep it hidden, but thank you.
Okay, but the point is, when you listen to Sirius NFL Radio and you listen to those folks, Pat Kerwin, Jim Miller, Charlie Weiss, okay, these guys are cream of the crop guys. Solomon Wilcots and some of the other folks
Bill
who are
Polian is on
Bill
here, too,
Polian. Do you hear these people? Do you hear them presenting some of the crap you're reading as fact? Do you hear them talking about it? They got a hell of a lot, right?
Paulie, it was just something that I thought. But I just want to get off something. I just want to ask you guys something, and I get to my
Yeah, because you said you were going to go down swinging. I'm dying to take a look at this swing.
All right,
yeah.
go ahead.
Can I ask you guys something?
Yes.
Like I said, a lot of reports say that Mike Casca isn't happy. If Mike Casca leaves for another coordinator's job or whatever, will that raise a red flag, or it's part of, well, it is what it is?
Well, I mean, once again, it depends on the circumstance. I mean, you're asking a hypothetical. I will say this, and I think, I will say this. I think, with respect to the time frame, I think the clock is ticking. It would be very out of character. This is just my personal opinion, and Paul, I'm curious to hear your perspective. We're at the Super Bowl. By the time the Super Bowl wraps up, most staffs are going to be finalized. So when you throw out this, if he winds up leaving, I mean, when is this going to happen? Is it going to happen in the middle of March, April? Because it's highly unlikely, based on where we are in the calendar, that I think something like that will come to fruition.
Wilson, listen up. Listen up just one moment here. You can't assume anything, and this is the problem. The media wants you to assume whatever cockamamie story that they throw out there to be true. I'll give you a great example. Patrick Graham. All right, but Patrick Graham was the defensive coordinator with the Dolphins.
Yep.
Okay? He was happy there. They loved him there. But he had a chance to come up to work for the Giants. In his past, he had been here before. He had also had roots at Wagner College on Staten Island. And he said to the Dolphins, "Is it okay? I'd like to come up and work for the Giants." So he came up here because he had roots here and he liked it here and he wanted to be here. It wasn't that he wasn't happy with the Dolphins, and it wasn't that Miami was unhappy with him. But see, you would have this wonderful scenario of assumptions and of the webosphere tell you that there was a problem. But there wasn't a problem.
I'm not assuming anything, Paulie. All I'm saying is, Paulie, listen, unfortunately, like I told John a couple of weeks ago, I'm not in the building. So I got to rely for what I hear and what I read. And then I bring the question to you guys. That's all. Because, Paulie, I'm not in the building. I don't work. You know what I'm saying.
Well, listen, I
have to tell you what I read, whether it's true or it's not true. All I said was that I find it hard to believe for somebody just to wake up one morning and just write stuff out of the blue. That to me, I find hard to believe. But let's forget about that real quick. I want to ask you guys something on Kevin Thibodeau. Kevin Thibodeau talks like he's Reggie White, and to me, he's the most overrated player on the Giants. He hasn't earned the right to talk about other teammates' contract. Okay, so I don't know what's going on. This guy had 11 sacks, right? Out of those 11
and
sacks,
a half, yeah.
Three against the Jets, I think 2 against the Commanders. The other 6, the quarterbacks run into him. He makes no impact whatsoever on the game. Come on, I mean.
All right, Wilson.
Wilson, I think you're reading a little too much into things, and I appreciate the phone call. I mean, everybody is entitled to an opinion. So I'm never going to blame. If a player is interviewed by somebody and they're asked a question, they give an opinion, you can't all of a sudden say, well, you got to be Reggie White to be able to give an opinion. I don't think we can operate in that world. I think everybody's entitled to an opinion, and then it's you, the consumer, that is there to judge whether or not you want to digest that opinion and put stock and substance behind it. But that doesn't mean that a player doesn't have the right, that meaning a player can only weigh in, Paul, or a coach based on their resume. I mean, that to me is a very small-minded perspective. So, I mean, I don't read much into that. And it goes back to what Paul said. There's so many outlets that everyone beyond Reggie White and beyond Hall of Famers will eventually have a platform to speak their mind, because between the internet, radio, and television, it's diluted. There is so much that you could consume and turn to speak your mind. So I would not get all worked up and criticize a player because, they decided to weigh in on a variety of topics. That, I think, is beyond the realm here. As far as the speculation, listen, there are times where perception meets reality, and there are also times where I believe perception does not add up to reality. But all of those operate on different situations. I don't think there's one rule of thumb. All we're saying is that everything can't be read into that if a coach leaves or decides to move on, that it's a confirmation of bad blood or issues. And
100%.
You brought up the Dolphins example. I'll bring up another example which just happened. Vic Fangio also left Miami.
Yes.
Okay? He took the Philadelphia job, and
he's closer to home.
A Pennsylvania native. So there were reports that indicated that Fangio wanted to be closer to his family. He also had worked for the Eagles organization as a consultant the previous year. So he speaks to the coaching staff. He wants to move on. Mike McDaniel gives him the blessing. He's able to leave. Now, at the same time, in fairness, there were also some reports that Fangio didn't necessarily get along with all of his defensive players. So people are going to run with that as opposed to taking into consideration that he wanted to get closer to home. You know what? Both things could actually have some warrant behind it, right? I mean, you could say that he didn't necessarily see eye to eye with all of his players, but at the same time, there was no bad blood between he and McDaniel. He wanted to get closer to home. McDaniel gave him the blessing, and he moved on. So that's why I'm saying every situation really needs to operate on an island as opposed to being grouped together.
The point is, don't work backwards and fit the narrative into the facts.
Yeah.
Let the facts speak for themselves. Don't go backwards. And that's, unfortunately, the best way to get clicks is to, and get attention and draw attention to yourself, is to have a narrative and then fit the facts into the narrative. And now all of a sudden you've got something that's explosive and that's all over the crawl, all over TV and all over the web and all over Twitter. So again, to go back to Wilson's point, sometimes the stuff is just pure smoke. Sometimes there's a little bit of substance to it. And every once in a while, maybe it actually is the real thing. But you can bet
you can't generalize.
You can bet that 9 times out of 10, if there's a way to blow it up into a bigger story, right now in this media environment, that's what they will do. Because that's the way you generate attention. And that's how the media is trying to survive these days.
Well, I think what's dangerous now is, just to bring this back full circle, is the fact that every move is tried to now, or attempted to fit into
the narrative,
a specific narrative,
right,
or storyline.
It goes it's backwards.
Yeah, meaning when Denard Wilson takes the Tennessee job, that means that something's bad here, when it may have nothing to do with it. And
exactly.
Once again, as I pointed out earlier in the show, he has a connection to Rand Carthen, the general manager, and he probably, I think if you connect the dots, was waiting to see if Mike McDonald leaves, Baltimore may promote me. And would you stay with an organization where you've been with for a few years for the sake of continuity? Doesn't that make sense, Paul? Then maybe jump ship and go externally? I mean, and it could simply be that as opposed to anything related to the Giants. And the other thing with respect to people moving, as I mentioned, I think by the time we get past the Super Bowl, so within the next week and a half, Paul, I would expect most coaching staffs to be finalized. Mm-hmm. So you're probably not going to see much movement after that. By the time we get into, February 12th through the 15th in that ballpark. Beyond that, you're not going to see movement because staff's got to start free agency preparation before, we're going to be at the beginning of March. They can't all of a sudden be deciding on who's going to fill out their staff.
I think it's March 5th, right?
I believe so. Yeah. And remember, soon we're also going to have the franchise tag period too, before even free agency begins. So this is why things move so quickly in the NFL. So when you want to speculate about a coach leaving or whatever it may be, look at the calendar right now. Here we are. It's February 1st. This is the time of the year where staffs are being finalized. The jigsaw puzzle is not all of a sudden being shred apart and then put back together.
I will add one other thing which always comes into play when you're talking about coaches, especially coaches who have families. I won't name a name because it's not important. But I know of one coach who had family, kids, wife, kids. It was a very difficult thing for them to do, to live here in the New York market. And after being here for a short time, they realized that this was not a part of the country that they wanted to live in. They were used to another region in the country where they had friends and they had family, and they decided that, you know what, this environment just wasn't for them as a family. And so the coach wound up moving on because this was just not the environment that they felt comfortable raising their family in. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. And that doesn't mean there was anything wrong with the coach or there was anything wrong with the organization. It just meant that the family had a comfort zone in another area of the country, and they chose to go back there. There's nothing wrong with that. But you won't. That doesn't make for a great story.
Well,
it doesn't make for
not a sexy headline.
It doesn't make for a headline. It doesn't make for a crawl on the TV, and it doesn't make for a great Twitter, capture or Twitter hits. That doesn't do it. So you're not going to hear that. You're going to hear some made-up reason why the guy left because they need to get explosive headlines.
All right. With that being said, that is going to wrap up Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Will be up and running again on Friday, same time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, as we'll also provide the latest from the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. Today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and at Giants.com/podcast. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, and we'll speak to you on Friday right here on BBKL. Have a good one.